He never planned for his life to turn out this way. When he was younger, he believed hard work would always be enough. He believed patience would be rewarded. For a long time, he tried to live by those ideas. But reality slowly wore them down, day by day, until belief felt heavier than hope. He was an ordinary man with an ordinary name, living an ordinary life that had quietly fallen apart. The city around him never slept, but he felt invisible inside it. Bills stacked up faster than he could open them. Phone calls went unanswered. Promises he once made to himself now sounded like lies whispered by someone else. He had lost his job 6 months earlier. At first, he told himself it was temporary. He would find something better. He had skills, experience, and discipline. But weeks passed, then months. Interviews led nowhere. Emails were polite but empty. We chose another candidate. Again and again. Savings disappeared. Pride followed soon after. He moved from his apartment into a smaller room, then into a shared space where silence was rare and dignity was expensive. Every night, he lay awake listening to other people breathe, wondering how his life had become something he barely recognized. What hurt most was not hunger or exhaustion. It was the feeling of being unnecessary, like the world would not notice if he vanished. One rainy evening, after another long day of rejection, he wandered into an old part of the city where streetlights flickered and buildings leaned as if tired of standing. He had no plan. Walking was cheaper than thinking. That was when he saw the shop. It did not look inviting. The sign was old, carved with symbols he did not understand. The windows were dark, reflecting only his tired face. He would have kept walking if not for a small notice placed beside the door. The paper was simple. No decoration. Just words. Private contracts. Rare opportunities. Life-changing exchange. He laughed under his breath. It sounded like a scam, the kind desperate people fell for. But desperation has a way of softening judgment. He stood there longer than he meant to, rain soaking into his shoes. Inside, a voice whispered, "What do you have to lose?" The shopkeeper was an elderly man with calm eyes and a voice that never rushed. The room smelled of old paper and polished wood. Shelves were filled with boxes, scrolls, and objects wrapped in cloth. None of them had price tags. The shopkeeper listened more than he spoke. When the man explained his situation, he did not interrupt. He did not judge. When the story ended, the old man nodded slowly, as if this was a tale he had heard many times before. "There is a contract," the shopkeeper said. "It is not for everyone." The man almost left then. Something about the way the words were spoken made his chest feel tight. Still, he asked, "What kind of contract?" "A legal exchange?" The shopkeeper replied, "Recognized by systems older than this city. You offer yourself your service, your presence, your time. In return, you receive a royal jewel." The word royal sounded unreal, like something from a book. The man frowned. "It doesn't make sense." "It does to those who need it," the shopkeeper said gently. "The jewel," the old man explained, "could be sold legally through certain channels. Its value was enough to erase debt, secure comfort, and allow a person to start over. No tricks, no lies. Just a choice." "And the cost?" the man asked. "You belong to a royal household for a fixed period," the shopkeeper answered. "You are treated according to strict rules. You are not harmed. You are not humiliated. But you are not free." The word belong echoed in his mind. It sounded heavy, dangerous. The man stood up, pacing the small room. Every warning he had ever heard screamed at him to leave. But another voice, quieter and colder, asked how much dignity was left to protect anyway. He thought of his mother's worried calls, his friends who had stopped asking how he was doing, the mirror that showed a man aging faster than time allowed. "How long?" he asked. "Long enough to matter," the shopkeeper replied. "Short enough to survive?" And that night he did not sign anything. He went back to his room and stared at the ceiling until dawn. He imagined both futures, one where he walked away and continued sinking, another where he stepped into something unknown and terrifying, but final. Fear was familiar. The unknown strangely felt honest. 3 days later, he returned. The contract was written in clear language. No hidden lines. No rushed explanations. He read every word. His hands shook when he signed his name, but his mind felt oddly calm, as if the decision had already been made long before. The jewel was revealed only after the contract was sealed. It was small, glowing softly, resting in a velvet case. It did not look powerful, but holding it made his chest tighten. This tiny object carried the weight of his future. When the transfer was complete, the shopkeeper bowed not to the man but to the contract itself. "You will be taken tonight," the old man said. "Pack nothing. You will be provided for." That evening, a black vehicle stopped silently outside the building. The man did not tell anyone goodbye. There was no one left who expected him to return. As the city lights faded behind him, he felt fear, regret, and relief mixing into something difficult to name. He was not running anymore. He had chosen an ending or perhaps a beginning. The journey was long and quiet. When he arrived, towering gates opened without sound. The place beyond felt unreal, like time itself moved differently there. Everything was clean, orderly, and distant. He was given simple clothing and shown to a room with no windows. The rules were explained calmly. Obedience, respect, silence, unless spoken to. His role was not described in detail. That worried him more than anything. He assumed he would be ignored. Just another name added to a list. He believed the royal household would never notice someone like him. That anonymity would protect him. He did not know yet that this belief was wrong. He did not know that his decision made in quiet desperation had already drawn attention. And he certainly did not expect that the foxwoman princess herself would one day ask to see him. But that was still ahead. For now, he lay awake in his new room, staring into darkness, realizing that for the first time in years, his life had direction even if it no longer belonged entirely to him. When morning came, it did not feel like morning. There was no sunlight to announce a new day, no noise from the outside world. The room remained the same, soft gray, calm, and distant. Time here did not rush. It waited. He woke before being called, his body tense, his mind alert. For years, mornings had been filled with worry: what to do, where to go, how to survive. Now those questions felt strangely quiet. They had been replaced by a single thought: follow the rules. A knock came at the door, gentle but firm. When he opened it, 2 attendants stood there. Their expressions were neutral, neither kind nor cold. They spoke little, guiding him through wide halls that echoed with soft footsteps. Everything was clean, polished, and controlled. Even the air felt measured. As they walked, he noticed others like him. Men and women dressed in similar, simple clothing, moving quietly, eyes lowered. No one spoke. No one smiled. It was as if emotion had been carefully stored away, only to be used when allowed. That was when the truth settled in fully. He was not a guest. He was not an employee. He was part of something owned. They showed him where he would spend most of his days. The work was not difficult, but it required attention, organizing, assisting, standing ready when needed. Nothing dangerous. Nothing personal. Yet the lack of explanation made everything feel heavier. He did not know who benefited from his effort, only that it was expected. At first he told himself this was temporary. Endure quietly. Stay invisible. Time would pass. But invisibility was harder than he imagined. There were rules he learned quickly. Do not ask unnecessary questions. Do not look directly unless spoken to. Do not show frustration. Mistakes were corrected without anger, but also without warmth. Correction itself was the language of this place. Days blended together. Meals arrived at the same hours. Rest periods were short but sufficient. Everything was designed to keep the body functioning and the mind calm. To calm at night, alone in his room, thoughts returned. He wondered how the jewel was being sold, who now held it, whether his debts were truly disappearing as promised. Those thoughts were comforting, yet distant, like memories from another life. What unsettled him most was the silence around the royal family. He heard their names spoken carefully, never casually. Some servants crossed themselves in old ways before entering certain halls. Others grew tense at the mention of inspections. Inspections. He learned the meaning slowly. From whispers exchanged when they thought no one was listening, from sudden changes in behavior when a corridor was cleaned twice instead of once. Inspections meant being seen, and being seen here meant change. One afternoon, a senior attendant stopped him longer than usual. The man's eyes lingered, studying him with quiet interest. "You chose this," the attendant said, not as a question. He nodded. The attendant seemed thoughtful. "That is rare." Those words followed him the rest of the day. He realized then that most people here had not chosen. They had been born into obligation, traded through tradition, or delivered by circumstances beyond control. His choice made him different. That difference did not protect him. It marked him. He began to notice subtle shifts. Instructions given directly to him instead of through others. Glances that lasted a moment too long. Once, he was asked to repeat his name for a record, even though it was already written. At night, sleep came slower. The royal household was not cruel, but it was precise. Every person had a place, and places could change. He started to understand that value here was not measured by strength or skill alone, but by intention. Why someone was here mattered almost as much as what they did. One evening, as he was finishing his tasks, the sound of movement rippled through the halls. Servants straightened. Voices lowered further. Doors closed softly. An inspection was coming. He was not called. At least not at first. Instead, he waited. Standing still, hands folded, heart beating too loudly in his ears. Time stretched. Each passing minute felt like a test he did not know how to pass. Later, a messenger arrived. Calm, direct. "You are to be available," the messenger said. That was all. He did not know what that meant, but he understood the weight of it. Being available meant being considered. As he returned to his room that night, fear returned, not the sharp fear of danger, but the slow fear of attention. He had come here hoping to disappear, yet something about him refused to fade. He wondered if the shopkeeper had known this would happen. If the contract had carried more than legal words, if it carried destiny. He sat on his bed, hands resting on his knees, breathing slowly. He reminded himself why he was here. To survive. To start over. To endure. But deep inside, another thought surfaced. What if survival was not the only thing being tested? What if his choice had invited something else entirely? In this place of order and silence, where nothing happened by accident, being noticed could mean opportunity or loss. He had no way of knowing which awaited him. All he knew was that the quiet life he hoped for was already slipping away. And somewhere beyond the guarded halls, a presence was becoming aware of him. Someone who did not inspect often, someone whose attention changed everything. He lay down, staring into the dim ceiling, realizing that the rules he followed so carefully might soon be rewritten. And when that happened, he would no longer be able to hide behind silence. Early that day, an attendant stopped him in the hallway and asked him to wait. The request was polite, but it did not feel optional. His heart began to race, though his face remained calm. He had learned quickly that showing emotion here only made things harder. He stood near a tall pillar as others passed quietly. No one spoke to him. Some avoided looking at him altogether. A few glanced his way, then looked down again. It felt as if they already knew something he did not. Time moved slowly. Each minute stretched longer than the last. Then the order came. He was to follow. The path they led him through was different from the usual halls. The floors were darker, the walls lined with old symbols carved into stone. The air felt cooler here, heavier. With every step, he felt as if he were moving farther away from the person he used to be. They stopped in front of a wide door. It was taller than any door he had seen in the household. 2 guards stood on either side, completely still. "Wait," one of them said quietly. The door opened without a sound. He stepped inside. The room was vast, but not crowded. Soft light filled the space, reflecting off smooth surfaces and tall curtains. Everything felt carefully placed, as if nothing here existed by accident. At the center of the room stood the Foxwoman Princess. He had heard stories, but none of them prepared him for the reality. She stood tall and calm, her presence steady and alert. Her fox-like features were graceful rather than frightening, her eyes sharp with intelligence. She did not smile, but she did not frown either. She simply observed. He lowered his gaze immediately, as instructed by the rules. "Look at me," she said. Her voice was clear, neither loud nor soft. It carried authority without effort. He raised his eyes. For a moment, the world felt very small. Her gaze was focused, direct and unsettling, not because it was harsh, but because it felt honest. As if she was not just seeing his face, but everything behind it. "You are the one who signed willingly," she said. "Yes," he answered. "Why?" The question caught him off guard. No one here asked why. They only told people what. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I had no other path that would lead forward." She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "That is not the same as having no choice." He realized then that this inspection was not about his posture, his work, or his obedience. It was about his mind. "You understood the cost," she continued. "Yes, and still you agreed." "Yes." Silence filled the room. It was not uncomfortable, but it was heavy. She walked slowly around him, her steps light, her eyes never leaving him. He remained still, hands folded, breathing steady. "Most people who arrive here try to escape their fear," she said. "You walked toward yours." He did not respond. He did not know how. She stopped in front of him. "Do you regret it?" The question surprised him even more than the first. He searched himself for the answer. Fear, yes. Uncertainty, yes. But regret? No, he said finally. Not yet. Something like approval flickered briefly in her expression before fading again. She turned away, pacing slowly. "You expected to disappear?" "Yes." "Why? Because being unseen felt safer?" She nodded slightly. "And yet you were noticed." He swallowed. "Yes." She stopped walking and faced him again. "This household does not value weakness, but it does not value strength alone either. We value awareness." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You are aware." The room seemed to close in around him. He felt exposed, as if every thought he had tried to bury was now laid open. "I did not come here to be special," he said carefully. "I came to endure." She studied him again, longer this time. "Endurance is a form of strength," she said. "But intention is what gives it meaning." She returned to her seat, folding her hands calmly. "You may lower your gaze," he obeyed. The inspection did not end immediately. Instead, she asked more questions. Simple ones, yet each felt deliberate. Where he came from, what he valued before he lost everything, what he feared most now. He answered honestly, even when honesty felt risky. Something about her made lies feel pointless. At last she stood again. "You will return to your duties," she said. "For now?" The words "for now" echoed loudly in his mind. As he was escorted back, his legs felt weak, though he did not stumble. The halls felt different, as if they were watching him now. That evening, changes began. His schedule shifted slightly. He was given tasks closer to the inner areas of the household. Nothing dramatic, nothing openly stated. But it was enough for others to notice. Whispers followed him. Curious glances. Questions asked without words. He tried to remain the same. Quiet, focused, obedient, but something had already changed inside him. He realized that being seen was not just about danger. It was about responsibility. The Foxwoman Princess had not judged him as an object or a number. She had judged his choice. And by doing so, she had given it weight. That night, alone in his room, he replayed the inspection again and again. Her questions, her silence, her final words. He understood now that his contract was more than a transaction. It was a test, not of loyalty, not of obedience, but of purpose. And whether he wanted it or not, he was already taking part in something larger than survival. Somewhere within the royal household, a path was forming around him. And once a path begins to form, it rarely disappears. He returned to his daily routine, but the routine no longer felt routine. The halls seemed quieter when he passed through them, as if the walls themselves were listening. The attendants, who once barely noticed him now, paused for a moment longer, their eyes studying him with a mix of curiosity and caution. No one explained the changes. They never did. His tasks shifted again, slowly, almost politely. He was no longer assigned to the outer sections of the household. Instead, he worked closer to the inner halls, where the rules were stricter and mistakes carried more weight. The work itself was still simple, but the meaning behind it felt heavier. He learned to move carefully, to listen more than before. Every sound mattered here. A footstep, a door closing, a pause in conversation. This place spoke without words. At first, he thought the attention would fade. He hoped it would. He told himself that the Foxwoman Princess had only been curious, nothing more. But days passed, and the attention did not leave. It settled. He noticed how some servants avoided him now. Others watched him closely, as if trying to understand what he had done to earn notice. No one asked him directly. Questions were dangerous in a place built on order. One afternoon, a senior attendant assigned him a task that required trust. It was small, but symbolic. He was to deliver documents to a guarded chamber and wait for confirmation before leaving. No one else was given that responsibility. As he stood outside the chamber, holding the documents carefully, he realized something important. Trust here was not given freely. It was measured, tested, and never permanent. When the door opened and the documents were accepted, the attendant nodded once. That single gesture carried more meaning than praise ever could. That night, sleep came slowly. He began to understand that power in the royal household did not always show itself openly. It moved quietly, through glances, timing, and silence. The Foxwoman Princess did not give direct orders about him. She did not need to. Her interest alone reshaped his position. He wondered why. He replayed their conversation in his mind. Her questions about choice, fear, and intention. She had not asked what he could do for the household. She had asked who he was when everything else was taken away. That thought unsettled him. For years he had defined himself by survival, paying bills, keeping promises, avoiding failure. When those things collapsed, he believed there was nothing left worth noticing. But she had seen something anyway. One evening, while organizing records, another servant spoke to him quietly. It was rare, almost forbidden. "Be careful," the servant whispered without looking at him. "Why?" he asked softly. "Because attention here does not stay neutral for long." Before he could respond, the servant moved away, leaving the warning hanging in the air. From that moment on, he became more aware of the balance he was standing on. Being unseen was no longer possible. Being favored was dangerous. The space between the two was narrow and unstable. He focused on discipline, on patience, on doing exactly what was asked, no more and no less. He did not try to impress. He did not try to disappear. He simply existed carefully. Days turned into weeks. The royal household continued its rhythm, but his place within it slowly shifted. He was asked for input on small matters. His observations were acknowledged. Once a correction he offered was accepted without question. Each moment felt like a step deeper into something he did not fully understand. The Foxwoman Princess did not summon him again, but her presence was felt. He saw her occasionally from a distance, moving through the halls with calm authority. When she passed, the atmosphere changed. Conversations stopped. Movements slowed. Once, their eyes met briefly across a wide hall. She did not speak. She did not signal, but she remembered him. That knowledge stayed with him long after she had gone. He began to reflect more deeply on his original choice. He had sold his time, his freedom, his presence, all for a jewel he barely remembered now. The jewel had solved his problems in the outside world, but it had brought him into a different kind of test. Here, value was not measured by money. It was measured by awareness, restraint, and purpose. Late one night, sitting alone in his room, he asked himself a question he had avoided since arriving. If the contract ended tomorrow, who would he be? The answer did not come easily. He realized that part of him had grown stronger here, not physically but mentally. He had learned to observe, to listen, to control fear instead of running from it. The same fear that once pushed him to desperation now sharpened his focus. He had not expected growth. He had only expected survival. Another change came without warning. He was reassigned to assist during gatherings where high-ranking members of the household were present. He was not a participant, only support. But proximity mattered. Standing quietly at the edge of those rooms, he saw how decisions were shaped, how words were chosen carefully, how silence could carry more weight than speech. He understood now why the Foxwoman Princess valued awareness. In this world, awareness was protection. Still, uncertainty followed him everywhere. He did not know whether her interest would eventually lift him higher or push him aside. He did not know if he was being prepared for something or simply studied. What he did know was this: the version of himself who had walked into the old shop, desperate and empty, no longer existed. He had allowed himself to be sold because he believed he had nothing left to offer. Now, standing within the royal household, he realized the truth was more complicated. He had offered his choice, and choice, once recognized, could not be undone. As he lay down that night, he accepted something quietly. The path ahead was no longer about endurance alone. It was about understanding the role he was being shaped for. Whether that role would bring safety or loss remained unclear. But one thing was certain: the Foxwoman Princess had not looked at him by accident. And whatever came next would not be accidental either. Time did not announce the end when it arrived. There was no signal, no ceremony, no sudden shift in the air. Life inside the royal household continued the way it always had, quiet, measured, controlled, and yet something within him had reached its final shape. He had stopped counting days a long time ago. At first, counting helped him feel grounded, like each number brought him closer to freedom. But over time, the numbers lost meaning. What mattered now were moments, small changes, subtle lessons, and the person he had become without noticing. He moved through the halls with calm confidence. Not pride, not fear, just awareness. He knew where to step, when to speak, and when silence mattered more than words. Others sensed it too. They no longer looked at him with suspicion or curiosity. They looked at him with understanding. He belonged here not as property, not as a symbol, but as someone who had learned the rules without losing himself. The Foxwoman Princess had not summoned him again in a long while. Her absence was not cold. It felt intentional, as if she had stepped back to see what he would become without her attention shaping him. And he had changed. He remembered the man who had walked into the old shop, soaked by rain and desperation. That man believed his worth had run out. He believed survival was the highest goal left to him. Now, survival felt like the beginning, not the end. One quiet evening, a senior attendant approached him with a message. It was simple, calm, final. The contract has reached its completion.
Wow.
The words did not bring the rush of relief he once imagined. Instead, they settled gently, like a long-held breath finally released. "You are free to leave at sunrise," the attendant added. Free. The word felt strange, heavy, almost unfamiliar. That night, he did not sleep. He sat in his room, looking at the walls that had once felt like limits, but now felt like witnesses. These walls had seen his fear, his doubt, his growth. Leaving them meant stepping into a world that no longer felt the same. He wondered if the outside world would recognize him. Before dawn, another message arrived. This one was different. The Foxwoman Princess wished to see him, one final time. He followed the familiar path to the inner chamber. His steps were steady, his heart calm. When the doors opened, she was there, standing near the window where soft light filtered in. She turned as he entered. "You have reached the end of your contract," she said. "Yes," he replied. "Do you understand what you gained?" He thought carefully before answering. "I understand what I lost," he said, "and I understand what I found." She studied him with the same sharp attention she had shown during their first meeting. But this time, there was no test in her gaze. Only confirmation. "You believed you sold yourself," she said, "but you only removed the noise that kept you from seeing who you are." He absorbed her words slowly. "The jewel you received solved your problems," she continued, "but the choice you made revealed your strength." She stepped closer, stopping a respectful distance away. "Not everyone who enters here leaves with themselves intact. You did." He lowered his head slightly, not out of obedience, but respect. "I did not save you," she added. "I only watched." "I know," he said. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You may go," she said finally, "and wherever you stand next, stand by choice." He left the chamber without looking back. At sunrise, the gates opened just as quietly as they had when he first arrived. The world beyond felt louder, brighter, less controlled, but it did not overwhelm him. He stepped forward. The city was still the city. People rushed. Cars moved. Life continued without pause. But he moved differently within it. He noticed things he once ignored. He listened more. He reacted less. The money from the jewel had done what it promised. His debts were gone. A modest home waited. Opportunities opened that once felt impossible. But those things no longer defined success for him. He had learned something deeper. He had learned that dignity was not given by freedom alone, nor taken by control. It was shaped by awareness and choice. He no longer feared being unseen. He no longer feared being noticed. He knew who he was, whether watched or alone. Sometimes late at night he thought about the royal household, about the silence, about the foxwoman princess who had looked at him and seen his intention instead of his fear. He did not miss that world, but he carried its lessons with him. He had allowed himself to be sold for a jewel, believing he had nothing left. What he never expected was that, in giving himself up, he would finally claim himself fully, and that was the one thing no contract could ever take away.